Um, okay, well, we want to welcome everyone to another week of online Bible class. Thank you for joining us again. This is our third week now where we've invited someone to join us and just kind of share their perspective on the scripture that we're reading. Again, we're walking together through the book of James, such an incredibly good book of the Bible. I know many people, it's just their favorite book because it's really approachable and it's really practical. And so anyway, we're really blessed today to have Clark Rush with us. And Clark, thank you very much for joining us. So Clark, how's your week going?
It's going pretty good. I'm not sure if this week is weirder than the other weeks this year or if it's as weird, but yeah, it's pretty good.
And next week's Thanksgiving, so it'll be another weird week. So good stuff. Well, let's dig in here to our Bible passage this week, and I'm gonna read this just to get us started. We're in the book of James, chapter 1. And this week we are reading verses 12 through 15. And so it says here, God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Afterward, they will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. And remember, when you are tempted, do not say, God is tempting me. God is never tempted to do wrong, and he never tempts anyone else. Temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to sinful actions, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. What do you bring away from this passage? What's your perspective here?
I think the first part that jumps out at me is the part that says, never say God is tempting me. And it makes me wonder, who was the intended audience? Like, was this a big problem? Is this something that we all struggle with? I think that I kind of wondered, what if we turned it into a question of, is God tempting me? And because the assumption that is wrong here is God is tempting me. So I wonder if we turned it into a question, is God is tempting me? Then we can, the answer is no, that's what he tells it, but we can also compare it to why does God allow temptation, which is kind of similar to the question, why does he allow suffering? And it says in verse 13 that God doesn't cause evil things, and then in other parts of the Bible we learn that he redeems them. It kind of reminds me of the story of Job, he suffers so much hardship, but at the end God redeems it. And what's interesting about that story that might not be similar here is he redeems it in a very physical way. Job loses so many family members and stuff like that, but God kind of replaces them in a way. So it might not be the same as how we experience the same type of redemption. But I think that he does redeem us too. And he does redeem the hardships and stuff that we're going through. And that's kind of reflected in verse 12 when he talks about receiving the crown of life, I think.
What? So it's talking about temptation here. And before you go on to something else, why do you think we are so tempted? Again, going to that, why do you think we're tempted to blame God for our own temptations or when things go wrong? Even when we say things like, God, why is this happening to me? It's almost like we're saying, God, why are you doing this to me?
I kind of wonder whether sometimes we wonder do we deserve this? Is this something that we've put upon ourselves? Or I also wonder, like, is it a laziness of we don't want to take responsibility for the actions or the temptations that we get? I'm not sure if it's a refusal to believe that there's other evil forces in the world that or in the spiritual world that are trying to tempt us. But as we see in the passage, some things get blamed unnecessarily on God.
Oh yeah. And if God's not to blame, then that means I am. And I have to take responsibility, and that gets to be a real challenge. Did you did you have anything else that you're thinking from this passage, or anything else you wanted to share?
I kind of think the verse 15 is interesting. It kind of seems like I don't remember what the specific quote is, but I feel like there's a point in Star Wars. This sounds funny, but a point in Star Wars where Yoda is talking about like fear causes anger, and anger causes causes us to go to the dark side. It seems like here where he says once desire has been conceived, then it gives birth to sin, and sin gives when it is full grown gives birth to death.
Yeah.
And it's it's obviously different from the Star Wars quote, because I'm not sure if George Lucas had that part in mind when he wrote Star Wars.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting, partly that our desires unacted upon, it seems like aren't necessarily sin, but they're like they're dangerous of becoming sin. And so it's an interesting chain of events. And it's I think it's interesting that even sin by itself isn't death yet. Like, God still has a chance to redeem what's happening.
Yeah, man, that's really, really great wisdom, I think, for us all to remember. Because I think not only is it hard for us to take responsibility, and we quickly want to blame, but then we also beat ourselves up so hard when we mess up. And we have to remember, like you said, just the desire alone or the temptation alone is not sin. And then even when sin enters, the sin itself is not death. It just gives birth. It just takes us closer and closer to that edge, closer to that point. So we have to remember that until death comes, God can always redeem it, like you've been saying, and that's really, really good news. And so I think a good question for us to like, as we're going along, is, are these God's desires, or are these my desires? And I think that's a really good way to help us separate out maybe what road we're starting to head down. For sure. Yeah, really. Thank you for bringing that up. Hey, I wanted to ask you, what kind of going back to verse 13, what kind of comfort does it give you knowing that God is never tempted to do wrong, that he never does wrong, and he never tempts anyone to do wrong? How does that bring you comfort?
I think it's reassuring, just the fact that, like, there's someone out there, there's something out there that isn't bad, that's pure good. And just to know that being or that thing is happens to be God, happens to be all powerful. I think that's reassuring. I think that part of isn't tempted by evil and doesn't tempt anyone makes me think. It helps remind me that he's working all things, like, for good, like for the good of his people. And I think, to me, that means spiritual good. Like, I'm not exactly sure how much he cares about us physically, or how much our physical, or even what we think is our own needs, like how much he really needs us, how much he needs us to be like that, but that he does care for our spiritual needs, for our he wants us to be with him and in him.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm along the lines of what you said there. I'm having to remind myself frequently that, God, he is not always taking away the pain, and he's not, he's not taking away the consequences of things that go on in our life, but he's redeeming those, like you said, and he's caring for us spiritually. And so there can be a moment of extreme pain that can bring us, can really bring us closer to him, and bring us greater wisdom and understanding and empathy with other people. Kind of to maybe wrap up, I just wanted to ask if there was anything else that you had that you wanted to add, anything else that you were wanting to share about this passage for this week.
No, I don't think I have anything more to add. um I think what I'd come away with is um that the power of redemption is, I think, even though that word redemption never pops up in these few verses, like, just that idea still seems to be behind it.
Yeah, yeah, that's great, and I think that's such an important point you made, just to remind us um, that he is working in and redeeming. I mean, until we take our last breath, there's always that possibility, and so it's just great encouragement for sure. Well, Clark, listen, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you. You just taking the time and taking the energy to look over this and to share your thoughts with us about God's word.
Thank you.
Okay, well, again, I want to say a huge thanks to Clark for joining us. Really grateful. And we do have a couple of more teens who are planning to do this over the next few weeks, but I would like more to sign up, because we've got several more weeks to go through the book of James. There will be no midweek youth group this coming Wednesday, the Wednesday right before Thanksgiving, but we do plan on having two more Wednesday night youth groups before the end of the year, the first two Wednesdays in December. It will depend on what kind of COVID restrictions we're up against and what we think is maybe the safest thing for all of us. But stay tuned for those, and we'll let you know what we're able to do. We do continue our deep dive studies, which are a smaller group together. And we're doing those on Sunday nights. Stay tuned to social media and our text announcements for when those will be meeting. Otherwise, I just hope everyone has a great Thanksgiving. Enjoy the time with your families, and be safe. Take care.